For centuries, the Carthane Dominion had written its history in the language of ash. Their fleets moved through the stars the way storms move across open water, inevitable, indifferent, and absolute. System by system, world by world, the Dominion advanced along its relentless arithmetic of conquest, resistance subtracted, civilizations divided, survivors reduced to the remainder of whatever the conquerors decided to leave behind. Planets that defied them didn't burn so much as simply cease, their continents cooling slowly into silence, their atmospheres drifting outward into the void and thin, dissipating clouds that smelled, if you were close enough, of everything that had once lived there. No empire had ever stopped them. No coalition had ever held. The Dominion did not negotiate, did not compromise, did not pause to consider the worth of what it erased. Its commanders had grown so accustomed to the architecture of submission that they had come to mistake the pattern for a law of nature, the way smaller bodies fall toward larger ones, helpless against the mathematics of gravity. Their arrival in any system carried only one message, delivered not in word but in the sheer, suffocating weight of their formation. Surrender, or become a memory that no one remains alive to keep. Supreme Commander Varric stood at the forward observation deck of the Sovereign Ruin, watching the local star dim as his fleet slid between it and the inhabited worlds ahead. It was his favorite moment, this one, the dimming, the way a star's light, something that had burned for billions of years, indifferent to every creature that had ever looked up at it with wonder or prayer, could be eclipsed by something that had existed for barely 3 centuries. There was a philosophical satisfaction in it that Varric had never quite been able to articulate to his junior officers, most of whom were too focused on tactical displays to appreciate the poetry. Long-range scans painted a detailed picture of the system. Several inhabited worlds, the largest bearing the unmistakable thermal signatures of dense urban centers. Millions of lives arranged in their cities like light in a jar, unaware that the jar was about to be opened. His intelligence officers had already catalogued likely points of government communication, calculated optimal orbital insertion paths for the planetary assault platforms, identified the infrastructure targets whose destruction would accelerate surrender most efficiently. The Dominion was nothing if not thorough. Commander, his tactical officer, a grayscale veteran named Sorvith, turned from his console with the practiced neutrality of someone about to report something unusual. "We have a contact." "Escort formation." "No, sir." A pause that lasted precisely 1 second too long. "One vessel." Varric turned from the observation window. One, Sorva confirmed. He gestured toward the main display, where the contact resolved slowly into a visual image, a ship, small and dark against the deeper dark of open space, positioned in direct line between the Dominion fleet and the nearest inhabited world. It drifted with a kind of deliberate stillness, like a word placed carefully in the middle of a sentence. The bridge fell quiet in the way that rooms fall quiet when something has happened that no one yet knows how to classify. Varric studied the image. The vessel was modest by any military standard, a fraction of the tonnage of even his smallest destroyer. Its hull bore the weathered patience of long service. Scoring along the flanks that suggested old impacts absorbed and survived, plating that had been repaired enough times that the original surface was almost archaeological in nature, layers of history compressed into metal. It carried no visible weapon ports, no missile batteries, no defensive arrays that his senses could identify. It simply sat there, between his fleet of thousands in a world that didn't yet know it needed saving. "Transmit identification and surrender demand," Varric said. The response was silence. The fleet advanced. The demand was repeated, this time with a formal weight of Dominion authority attached, a legal architecture of ultimatum that had caused entire planetary government to collapse before his ships entered orbit. More silence. Then, so faint that the translation processes required a second pass to confirm it, a signal emerged from the lone vessel. The language resolved slowly on the communications display. And when it did, Sorvith read it aloud with a careful pronunciation of someone uncertain they were reading correctly. "Human vessel." The word moved through the bridge like weather. Varric watched his officers exchange glances, not the sharp, focused looks of tactical assessment, but something slower, something almost involuntary. Humans. He knew the species by reputation, as everyone in this sector did. Traders mostly. Explorers. Stubborn survivors of a homeworld that had nearly killed them twice before they'd managed to leave it. They were scattered across dozens of systems, too fractious to form an empire, too adaptable to stay in one place, too proud to accept the sort of collective humiliation that conquest typically required. The Dominion had catalogued them as a low-priority concern, too dispersed to organize, too small to threaten. A second transmission arrived from the vessel, shorter than the first. The translation was immediate. "Do not advance." Sorveth waited for Varric's response with the expression of a man watching his commander for guidance on how to feel. Varric kept his face composed. He had a reputation for composure to maintain. "Continue forward," he said. "Standard formation." But even as he said it, even as the fleet complied, he found himself staring at that small, motionless ship and feeling something he hadn't felt in so long that it took him a moment to name it. Unease. The standard Dominion warning was transmitted with all the formal severity the situation technically didn't merit. Unidentified vessel. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. The human ship did not move. Around Varric, his officers went about the business of conquest with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this many hundreds of times. Weapons were aligned. Fighter wings were positioned for launch. The planetary assault platforms, massive, slow-moving constructions designed to remain in orbit for weeks if necessary, raining targeted destruction on whatever resisted below, powered to full readiness. The machinery of the Dominion ground forward with the momentum of a thing that had never been stopped. Then the reply came. Not panicked, not desperate, not the crumbling bravado of a species watching its end approach and grasping for dignity in the final seconds. The voice was steady and unhurried, as though it had all the time in the universe and had decided, on balance, that this particular moment didn't require any more words than were necessary. This system is under human protection. Turn back. Someone on the bridge made a sound that might, in a different context, have been laughter. Protection, one officer muttered, from one ship. Varric transmitted again. You stand alone. You cannot stop us. The response arrived instantly, for words that settled into the silence of the bridge like stones dropped into still water. We are not alone. Sorveth ran an immediate full-spectrum sweep. The results came back clean in every direction. No hidden fleet lurking at the system's edge. No reinforcements burning through faster-than-light transit. No defensive stations powered down and waiting. Space was exactly as empty as it appeared. The human vessel floated alone in the dark, between the largest military force this sector had ever seen, and a world it had apparently decided to protect. Sensor ghost. Varric asked. Negative. The vessel is real, Commander. Its power readings are low. Its shielding is unclear. Hull composition is returning unusual density figures, but the vessel appears to carry no active weapon systems. Varric clasped his hand behind his back and studied the image for a long moment. Continue forward. The order was obeyed. The fleet advanced. But that feeling, that quiet, sourceless unease, did not leave him. At 4,000 kilometers, Varric ordered a full magnification of the human vessel's forward section. The image that filled his display was not what he had expected, though he could not have said precisely what he had expected. The ship was old in a way that felt almost intentional, its age worn not as decay but as credential. The hull plating was thick, scarred, and layered in a way that only comes from actual combat survived at close range. Script ran along the forward armor in human characters, weathered almost illegibility, but there, a name, a designation, something, a history compressed into letters he couldn't read. That ship has seen combat, one officer said quietly, studying his own display. Extensive combat, another confirmed, and yet it carried none of the aggressive posture of a warship preparing to engage. No weapon ports had opened. Its engine output hadn't changed. It hadn't maneuvered to a firing position or attempted to close the distance between itself and the Dominion fleet. It had simply remained exactly where it had chosen to be, positioned between destruction and the world it was protecting, patient as stone. A new broadcast emerged from the vessel, transmitted simultaneously on every available frequency. Not a threat, not a weapon lock, just words, repeated slowly, evenly, like someone saying something they hoped wouldn't need to be said twice. Do not force this outcome. Is it damaged? An officer asked, stalling for time. Sorveth shook his head. No distress markers, and there are no reinforcement detected anywhere in the system. Varric leaned forward in his command throne, elbows on his knees, studying that small, motionless vessel with an intensity that had nothing to do with tactical calculation and everything to do with a strange, persistent feeling that he was missing something, that some fundamental thing was present in this confrontation that his instruments couldn't measure and his experience hadn't prepared him for. The vessel wasn't afraid. That was it. That was the thing his instinct had been circling for the past several minutes, trying to land on. Every species of Dominion had ever encountered at this range, facing these numbers, had been afraid. Fear was a universal constant. It translated across every physiology, every culture, every level of technological sophistication. It expressed itself differently depending on the species, but it was always there, legible to anyone who knew how to read it. This ship was not afraid. It was waiting. Advanced formation, Varric ordered. Fire solutions ready. The Dominion fleet surged, and the human vessel vanished. Not destroyed, not retreating, not cloaked in any way the Dominion's considerable sensor array could detect. Simply gone. The alarms that erupted across the command bridge were almost ceremonial, notifications of a situation that no protocol existed to address. Officers called across the deck in overlapping voices, each confirmation adding to a picture that didn't make sense. Target loss. Contact vanished. Reacquiring negative. No drive signature, no energy distortion, no wreckage. Then a Dominion destroyer ceased to exist. There was no incoming fire, no missile trace, no beam, no energy discharge of any kind that the fleet's weapon sensors could categorize. The ship simply collapsed, its hull folding inward in a way that hull plating was never designed to move, before the internal pressure that compression forced outward again in a brief, silent bloom of debris. In the vacuum of space, it made no sound. That made it worse, somehow, a silent death, tidy and absolute. Then another destroyer, then a cruiser. The formation fractured. Captains threw their ships into evasive patterns, but there was nothing to evade, no attacking vector, no identifiable source, just destruction that appeared where it chose to appear and ignored everything between itself and its targets. Targeting systems swept desperately in every direction and found nothing. Weapons locks acquired nothing. The fleet, designed to project overwhelming force against opposition it could see and measure, found itself unable to perform the single function it had been built for. Gravitational spikes, Sorvith reported, his voice carrying the particular flatness of someone watching their model of reality fail in real time. Localized distortions forming at the point of impact. The hull compressions, they are not weapon impacts, Commander, they are gravity events. Precision gravity events. A heavy cruiser bent in the middle as though something enormous and invisible had taken it in two hands. Its spine fractured, its interior decompressed. It came apart in a slow, terrible, almost graceful unraveling. And then, for exactly one fraction of a second, a sliver of time barely long enough to register on the fastest tactical displays, the human vessel appeared inside the Dominion formation, not at its edge, not approaching from outside, inside, surrounded on every side by Dominion warships, serene and unharmed amid the fleet that should have been destroying it. Then it was gone again. 3 more ships imploded. Varric stood at the center of his bridge and felt the cold mathematics of the situation arrange themselves in his mind with the clarity of proof. He looked at the pattern of destruction, which ships had been struck, in what order, what they had in common, and understood. Command vessels, weapons platforms, navigation arrays, long-range communications relays. The strike pattern was not random. It was not retaliatory. It was a precise, methodical dismantling of the fleet's capacity to conduct offensive warfare, executed with a patience and accuracy that suggested something terrifying, that whoever, whatever, was doing this had studied his formation long before it arrived, had identified every critical system, and was now removing them in the most efficient possible sequence. They were not being attacked. They were being disassembled. And throughout it all, life support on every struck vessel remained intact. Every crew was still breathing. The human vessel materialized one final time, visible to the entire remaining fleet, positioned at the center of the wreckage it had made. It hung there quietly, motionless again, as though it had never left, as though the last 10 minutes of systematic devastation had cost it nothing at all. The transmission it sent was brief, and it needed to be. Every word landed with the weight of demonstrated fact. You were warned. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Varric had ever heard. Around him, What remained of the greatest fleet the Dominion had dispatched to this sector drifted in damaged disarray. The elegant formation that had darkened the star's light less than an hour ago was gone. In its place were scattered warships with bent spines and dark weapon ports, engines misfiring, navigation systems returning error codes, command signals tangling in the wreckage of destroyed relay stations. His officers moved through their stations with the careful movements of people who have recently discovered that the ground beneath them is less solid than they believed. The human vessel floated at the center of all of it, calm, still, unhurried. It did not pursue the ships that were already attempting to edge away from it. It did not fire again. It did not transmit celebration or triumph or demand. It simply remained, as it had remained at the very beginning, between the fleet and the world behind it, patient and absolute. A transmission came through. Bypassing every remaining encryption layer the Dominion fleet possessed, as though those layers didn't exist. The voice that arrived in the bridge was the same voice that had spoken at the very beginning. Steady, uninflected, neither warm nor cold. Your weapons have been neutralized. Your propulsion is limited. You will not advance further. Varric found his voice. It took more effort than he expected. You show mercy, he said, and even as he said it, he understood it was the wrong word, a category error. But he needed to say something, needed to impose some familiar framework on what was happening, because the alternative was to admit that no framework he possessed was adequate. A pause, brief, but considered, as though the speaker had a number of possible answers and was selecting the most accurate one. We show restraint. Around the bridge, damaged targeting systems flickered back to life and immediately died again, one after another, as something reached into the Dominion fleet's software architecture and quietly closed every door. Not destroyed, controlled, managed. Power was rerouted to the systems that kept crews alive and rerouted away from anything that could threaten the world behind the human vessel, and none of it required a single additional weapon discharge to accomplish. "They're inside our systems," his tactical officer said softly. The disbelief in his voice was almost academic, the tone of someone who has encountered something they will spend the rest of their career trying to understand. "Complete access. Every ship." The human vessel transmitted once more. "This world is under our protection. Withdraw. No further action will be taken." Varric looked at the vessel for a long time. He thought about the centuries of Dominion history behind him, the thousands of systems, the hundreds of civilizations, the long, unbroken record of a force so overwhelming that the idea of stopping it had simply never become anyone's project. He thought about the species he had dismissed as scattered traders, explorers, stubborn survivors, no military threat. He thought about the word protection and what it meant in context of what he had just witnessed, not power wielded for conquest, not force deployed for dominion, but something rarer and in its own way more terrifying, a limit, a line, a no, spoken by something with the capability to enforce it absolutely and the apparent preference not to. They could have destroyed his fleet. Every life on every ship was still breathing because something had decided that those lives, enemies though they were, did not need to end today, that the goal was not punishment but prevention, that the message being sent was not "we are stronger than you," though they clearly were, but something older and more fundamental. Not here, not this world, not today, not ever. He straightened, opened the fleet-wide command channel. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but it carried, "All vessels, prepare for withdrawal." The words fell into a silence so complete that he could hear the hum of life support systems and nothing else. No one spoke. No one challenged the order. Somewhere in the history of the Dominion, this moment will be an anomaly, a footnote, an event that required an entirely new category of entry in the military record. He did not care about the footnotes. One by one, the surviving warships of the greatest fleet the Dominion had sent to this sector turned away from the world they had come to conquer. Engines ignited slowly, carefully, at the speeds that the human vessel permitted them. Navigation systems recalculated exit vectors toward open space, toward the jump corridor that would take them somewhere this human ship was not. The great fleet retreated, and the human vessel did not follow. It did not broadcast a retreat across open channels to humiliate them. It made no sound at all. It simply held its position, watching them go with whatever instrument it used to watch, patient and unhurried, the same ship it had been when it first appeared on their sensors, small, ancient, impossibly scarred, utterly unmoved. The last Dominion ship crossed the system boundary. The last ship jumped, and the stars were quiet again. Only then did the Guardian vessel turn. It moved slowly, with a careful deliberateness of something that had been still for a long time, and was not yet ready to rush. Its course resolved toward the inhabited world it had defended, the world whose inhabitants were only now beginning to understand, through the long-range observations and fragmented communications of the last hour, what had happened in the space between them and the dark. What they made of what they saw is something the records don't entirely capture. There are accounts of people standing in the streets of cities, looking up at a sky that looked the same as it always had, knowing that it was not. Communications from surface to orbital stations, from station to station, spreading the word in a dozen languages. It held. The line held. One ship, and it held. The story did not stay in that system. Stories like this never do. It moved through the channels that information always finds, trade routes and diplomatic relays, and the quiet, person-to-person transmission of something too important to be kept. It reached hidden settlements in asteroid belts and fragile colonies on the edges of map space, places where people had learned to live small and careful and afraid, where the habit of fear had become so deeply ingrained that hope required active effort to sustain. And in those places, something changed. In the silent halls of Dominion administration, the reports were reviewed by people who had built careers on the assumption of inevitability, the assumption that power, applied in sufficient quantity, overcomes everything. Those people sat with the reports for a long time. They cross-referenced the sensor data, verified the vessel count, confirmed the timeline. They requested additional analysis from technical staff who returned the same answers they had already received, answers that didn't fit any model they possessed. One ship, no fleet support, no reinforcements, the weapons dismantled, the crews alive, the world untouched, the fleet withdrawn. The Dominion did not abandon its empire that day. It did not renounce conquest or dismantle its planetary assault platforms or send diplomatic delegations to every world it had ever reduced to ash. The mathematics of what had happened were not sufficient, on their own, to reverse 3 centuries of institutional momentum. But something shifted. Something that had always been assumed to be a constant turned out to be a variable. And the people who had built an empire on the certainty of that constant found themselves, for the first time, in genuinely unfamiliar territory. The Guardian vessel completed its transit and assumed a slow, high orbit above the world it had defended. From the surface, on a clear night, you could see it, a point of light that moved steadily across the stars, unhurried, methodical, tracing the same path again and again. People looked up at it. They had done so before, in other systems, on other worlds, looked up at moving lights in the night sky and felt a particular human mixture of wonder and dread that comes from knowing that something vast and indifferent is passing overhead. But this was different. This light was not passing. This light had stayed. Someone, somewhere, sent a transmission to the vessel. It was not a diplomatic communique. It was not an official communication from any government. It was, by all accounts, just a person at a terminal in the middle of a sleepless night, sending words into the dark towards something they didn't fully understand, because the alternative was to say nothing. Thank you is what they sent. The Guardian vessel's reply, if it came, was not recorded in any official archive. But the people who built that vessel, and the people who had sent it, and the people who had decided, at some point in their long, difficult history of building things and losing them and building them again, that protection was worth more than conquest, that restraint was a form of power that destruction could never achieve, that one ship in the right place at the right moment could say something that 1,000 ships could never say. Those people went on building vessels. They went on sending them to the edges of the systems where they lived. They went on standing in the dark, small and ancient and impossibly scarred, exactly where they had chosen to stand. Because humanity had learned, through every war it had ever started and survived, through every civilization it had built on the ruins of the last one, through every moment it had looked up at a star it couldn't reach and decided to reach for it anyway, that there was a difference between power and strength. Power said, I can destroy you. Strength said, I won't. And in that difference, in that quiet, stubborn, chosen restraint, was something the Dominion had never encountered before and found itself unable to calculate, unable to target, unable to dismantle. Hope, it turned out, was a harder thing to kill than any warship, and the humans had been building it for a very long time.